It was 2:15 a.m. when the newsman came on the radio to let everybody know that it was indeed late. The deep-voiced burnout made a joke about what kind of business could be taken care of after 2 a.m., referencing the BTO track he'd played earlier in the set. The Sioux City Strangler smiled. He could only think of two kinds. Keeping a cigarette lit through most of his drive to stay awake, the Sioux City Strangler sang along to the rock songs that he knew and played finger drums on the wheel if he didn't know the words to a particular tune. He was headed back home, and even without heavy midday traffic, he was facing a near 3-hour drive. He thought about putting the pedal down and doing 90 on the highway, but with a dead housekeeper in the trunk, he decided against it. Slow and steady wins the race, and in this case, might just keep you from landing in federal prison for the rest of your life. The drive was long and grew tiresome, even for a man that was on a mission to dispose of a body. The Sioux City Strangler stopped off at an all-night gas station to get coffee once about an hour into his drive. An hour later, he felt like he needed another cup, but he was worried about making it to his destination before sunrise. Once the sun came up, every move he made became a risk. Instead, he lit another cigarette, dropping the last butt into the gas station coffee cup, swirling it around in his right hand to extinguish the cherry. He cracked the window to let some smoke out and allow some fresh air in. Fresh air that he hoped would keep him alert a little while longer. As he drove, he replayed war home movies in his mind without thinking to stop them. He remembered the time that his friend Hank, a big fat white guy with a haircut that would remind you of Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, got shot in the stomach. Another guy named Clarence, Hank's physical opposite in that he was a beanpole black guy working on regrowing his afro, had pulled him into a clearing and called for help on the radio. The Sioux City Strangler thought of the feeling he had in that moment, knowing that he had to do something even though he didn't want to do it, even though he knew it was a completely futile fucking gesture. He knew what the outcome was going to be, even if he did try to slow the flow of blood spilling onto Hank's pants. His mind made a jump cut to drinking a cold Coke from a glass bottle, sitting in a cafe in the American part of Saigon, enjoying the scenery, but with a sense of unease. Later, he would see the 1978 film The Deer Hunter and wonder how close his fellow soldiers, guys like Hank and Clarence, had all been to finding a game of Russian roulette of their own. The Sioux City Strangler put out his cigarette and turned the radio up a notch higher, though it was already loud. He wasn't trying to drown out the war stories in his head, though. He was in another space now, trying to give them a soundtrack. In the moment, it was all just animal movement, lizard brain action. Only much later did he realize that his mind snapped back to Vietnam in stressful situations to give his body cues, a war-curated muscle memory of sorts to avoid danger. At 5:05 a.m., the Sioux City Strangler saw the highway sign announcing that he'd reached the city limits. He was home again, and with the Vietnam reel playing in his mind, he thought back to the day he returned from battle. Much like now, there was nobody there to greet him, no parade, no banners. Only a dark road ahead with just his headlights to guide him the rest of the way. This is the story of the Sioux City Strangler, a man who terrorized the great state of Iowa for nearly 10 years before making his way to California for a little fun in the sun and a fresh crop of citizens to terrorize. I'm your host, Mary Buckley, and you're listening to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast. After exiting the highway, the Sioux City Strangler made a right turn, a left turn, and another right turn, what seemed like his 100th lit cigarette in his hand. He was home, back in Sioux City, the place where he grew up, the place he knew better than anywhere in the world. He wound around the streets of a semi-industrial area, a neighborhood where machine shops and leather workers and even a now-defunct brewery did their business. These businesses employed early risers, but the Sioux City Strangler wasn't worried. After a few more turns, the Sioux City Strangler stopped his machine, put it in park, and put out his cigarette, dropping the butt into the gas station coffee cup from earlier that night. His headlights were pointing at a large warehouse building, emptied out and abandoned a year before when Sears Roebuck moved their operations elsewhere. The radio man came back on, announcing that it was no longer late. It was, in fact, quite early now. The time was 5:15, and the night shift workers would be heading home soon, replaced by the early morning laborers. Luckily for him, this abandoned building was on a dead-end street, and the only other business in clear sight was a commercial vehicle repair shop. No night shift workers over there. He surveyed the scene closely, looking for any movement, though he felt confident the area would be empty until at least 6 a.m. After a long minute, the Sioux City Strangler fired up his machine again and made a half-loop in the wide street, backing his Pontiac up closer to the building. This time he killed the headlights, too. Now parked, the Sioux City Strangler began moving quickly, but deliberately. This was the point where he needed to take decisive action. The smoother and faster he went about his business, the sooner he would be out of there. There was no time left to look around and wait. At 5:18, the Sioux City Strangler cut the lock to the chain-link gate in front of the property. He smiled as he did it, remembering the day he'd thought to put bolt cutters in the trunk of his car permanently. He knew they'd come in handy. Pulling the gate open, the Sioux City Strangler walked to the main entrance of the building. Unlike the chain-link gate, the building appeared well secured with multiple locks and layers of woven chain. He stood there longer than he should have, wanting a cigarette. He'd planned to move the housekeeper inside the building, thinking that once he made it past the gate in front, he would be home free. The Sears Roebuck Company had decided to protect their property a little better than he thought they would. A wave of dread washed over the Sioux City Strangler. He had a decision to make, and there was no good choice. He was going to have to leave the housekeeper outside where she might be spotted by any passerby, few though they may be, or he was going to have to find another place to put her. He looked up at the sky and saw that the darkness was lifting. The sun would be out soon, and so would the people coming into the area for work. He might not get spotted leaving the body, but how many people would see him in his car driving out of the area if he spent another 30 minutes trying to break into the building? His mind was racing and his heart was beating hard, a cold sweat forming on his skin. For a moment, he contemplated leaving the housekeeper in his car for one more night. He could come back late, maybe at 3 a.m., and break into the building under the cover of darkness. The idea of taking Maria somewhere she needed to go with a dead body in the trunk made his stomach turn. "No, sorry, honey, we can't put the groceries in the trunk, there's a corpse in there," wasn't something he wanted to say. Sure, he could say the latch was broken, but what if she tried it anyway? It wasn't worth the risk. The Sioux City Strangler went back to the car and got his cigarettes and lit one. He stood there, trunk open, looking down at the housekeeper as if her lifeless body held the answers. An image of Maria opening the trunk of their family car to find a woman's body, a ham under one arm and a grocery bag in the other, flashed in his mind. As the scene played, the ham hit the ground and the fresh oranges rolled out of the brown paper bag and into the parking lot. Maria screamed and began sobbing, the life she'd been building suddenly obliterated. No, he thought there was no way he could go home with the housekeeper in the trunk. If he couldn't drop her here right now, he'd have to stay gone. He could call her first thing and say that the boss had phoned, that he was needed for a special visit with a very important doctor, that he'd have to stay gone one more day. He was sorry, but it would just be one more night. Hell, he could say he was going to take some time off soon if she was upset. Appeasing Maria for his shitty work schedule wouldn't be hard. The Sioux City Strangler stood there thinking, playing out the phone call with Maria in his mind, when out of the corner of his eye he saw headlights in the distance. Instinctively, he closed the trunk, though the housekeeper was still wrapped up tight. The headlights were getting closer now, barreling down on him as he smoked the cigarette in his hand, trying to look casual, like he somehow belonged there. He clenched his teeth and waited, exhaling smoke from his nose. We'll be right back after this message from Care Clean Remediation Services.
Most of us take on a variety of cleaning tasks around our homes, apartments, and places of business. Some messes just aren't made for everyday cleaning though, and sensitive situations require a delicate touch. CareClean Remediation Services has over 15 years of experience handling cleanups of all kinds. At CareClean Remediation Services, we run thorough background checks on all of our cleaners and require full hazmat certification for each and every individual we employ. We also offer mandatory sensitivity training for new hires and continuing contractors who stay on for more than 6 months. That's why we are a top-rated national provider for unique cleanups that require special attention. No job is too big, too small, or too messy for the trained pros at CareClean Remediation Services. Contact us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by calling 855-787-6457 to speak with a compassionate representative that understands your needs. If you're interested in working with CareClean Remediation Services, visit our website at ccremediation.com today. We have a variety of employment opportunities for individuals looking for a rewarding experience helping people in their time of need.
A brown car, make and model still unclear, was heading toward the Sioux City Strangler now. He slowly walked toward the driver's side door and got in. The cigarette in his hand burned nearly down to the filter. He took a drag and watched the car with one eye, rolling the window down with his left hand to let the smoke out. As the car got closer, the Sioux City Strangler made it as a Plymouth Fury, probably a 1968 or 69 model. The driver was male, older, balding, and wearing thick, heavy glasses. The man wore no particular expression on his face. The Sioux City Strangler watched intently as the man slowed down and pulled to the right side of the street and stopped his car, keeping it running. The man stared straight ahead, and the Sioux City Strangler lit another cigarette, dropping the old one into the ashtray without stubbing it out. After what seemed like a full minute, the man reached over to the passenger seat, the back of his bald head visible as he slumped down. He sat upright again and unfolded a map against the steering wheel. Jesus Christ, thought the Sioux City Strangler. This is just some dumb son of a bitch who's lost on his first day to a new job or something. A sense of relief washed over him, though the lost man was now eating up valuable time. It was 5:30, and every minute closer to daylight made what he had to do more dangerous. The man in the Plymouth scratched his head and lit a cigarette of his own, still trying to make sense of the map. The Sioux City Strangler watched from across the wide street, though the man with the map didn't seem to notice him. He just smoked, looked at the map, and scratched his bald head in confusion. At 5:38, the brown Plymouth finally moved, passing by the Sioux City Strangler sitting in his car. The man driving never seemed to register that another car shared the street with him at all. The Sioux City Strangler watched the man drive away and make a right turn, then go out of view. He was alone again, but the pressure of the ticking clock was starting to weigh on him. He got out of the car one more time and walked to the building, hoping to find some sort of answer, some place to put the housekeeper's body that wouldn't be seen. At 5:41, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. Popping the trunk of his Pontiac, the Sioux City Strangler lifted the housekeeper's body up and out, a cigarette between his teeth. His head on a swivel, he walked toward the abandoned building and got as close to the double doors as he could. He lowered her body gently to the ground and checked the blanket, doing his best to make sure it was wrapped tightly around her. He took a drag from his cigarette and sighed out loud. For a moment, he thought about picking her back up, loading her into the trunk again, and finding a better spot, one where she wouldn't be seen by anyone passing by. He checked his watch and saw that it was 5:44 in the morning. He sat there, smoking yet another cigarette, debating what he should do. He turned the radio up and the newsman came on again. The Sioux City Strangler put the key in the ignition and turned it. He stepped on the gas pedal gently and drove away, leaving the body behind him. Sure, somebody might find the housekeeper, but they couldn't trace it back to him, right? Nobody saw anything except maybe the confused bald man in the brown Plymouth. It was 6:19 a.m. when the Sioux City Strangler parked his machine in front of the Fellows' Diner, a place about 10 miles from where he'd dropped the housekeeper. He wasn't sure he was hungry, but it was too soon to head home. Maria would ask him why he'd left so early instead of sleeping in, which was more his style on days off. The Sioux City Strangler drank 2 cups of coffee with lots of cream and sugar. As he sat there and watched businessmen, blue-collar workers, truck drivers, and even a few families stream in and out, his sour mood began to lift. At least for the moment, he'd gotten away with it. They probably wouldn't find her for a while anyway, since the old Sears Roebuck had been abandoned for some time. There wasn't even a for sale sign up, so it was unlikely that some fledgling industrial titans would be touring the building anytime soon. The Sioux City Strangler sat back in his chair and smiled. He took a deep drag off his cigarette and closed his eyes, picturing himself walking through the door to greet Maria, still in her pajamas and robe, smiling and drinking a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. A waitress with gray hair and tortoiseshell glasses cut his daydream short. She wanted to know if he was going to have any food, or, although she didn't say as much, if he was just going to suck down a full pot of coffee and fill the place with smoke. The Sioux City Strangler opened his eyes and nodded. He rattled off his regular order and smiled. He was going to have pancakes, bacon, eggs, toast, orange juice, and yes, some more coffee with milk on the side. We'll be right back after this message.
Class action settlements are supposed to hold big companies and multinational corporations accountable. But if you've been part of a class action settlement award in the last 20 years, you know that getting the compensation you're entitled to isn't automatic. The Class Action Compliant Consumer Advocacy Group is here to be your partner. Whether you're owed a few $100s or a few thousand, we make it our mission to provide you with a speedy payout, whether your class action was settled last decade or last week. Depending on your particular case, we may even be able to offer you a payout before your settlement amount has been decided and your case completed. To see if you qualify, visit us online at cacadvocacy.com and navigate to our pre-settlement page. Our virtual assistant is available 24/7 to answer any questions you may have when filling out our 10-minute questionnaire. Hold corporations accountable and get your settlement now by contacting the Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group today. Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group is not licensed to offer legal advice, legal service, or collect outstanding debts of any kind in Alaska, California, Delaware, Florida, Puerto Rico, or the U.S. Virgin Islands.
The Sioux City Strangler walked out of the Fellows' Diner with a lit cigarette in his hand at 7:20 a.m. after a leisurely breakfast. With the caffeine from a full pot of coffee and the nicotine from half a pack of Marlboros coursing through his veins, he felt awake, alert, and alive again. That familiar feeling of getting away with something, now a major motivator in the Sioux City Strangler's mind, even if he didn't realize it himself, didn't hurt either. He climbed into his Pontiac and smoked with the radio barely audible, thinking about driving home to Maria. If he headed straight there, he might still be able to catch her in bed. While the thought of snuggling up to her put a smile on his face, he wondered if his early arrival would feel strange to Maria. He thought of past business trips and realized he almost never made it home before 10 a.m., even when he returned on a Saturday. As he weighed his options and watched the early morning traffic on the street, a knock on the passenger side window startled him. A jolt of fear rushed through his body as he turned his head to see John Pruitt, his old high school classmate and current boss, standing there with a surprised look on his face. The Sioux City Strangler dropped his cigarette into the ashtray and got out to greet him, doing his best to put on a big smile. "Hey, John, what are you doing over this way?" "Oh, I've got a special appointment this morning with a few doctors from a medical group. You know I don't like to work weekends, but these are big fish, you know what I mean? Sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet and do what you have to do." "Right, yeah, I know what you mean. I guess if they can only meet on Saturday, you gotta do it, right?" "Right," said John Pruitt. John Pruitt didn't meet with many doctors himself anymore since he was running the office as the big boss behind his mahogany and brass desk, but he did keep some of his legacy clients. The larger medical groups weren't anything to mess with, and he didn't want to risk offending them by switching them over to a new salesman, good as they may be. "Getting breakfast?" the Sioux City Strangler asked, a little awkward. He stuffed his hands in his pockets looking for his cigarettes before realizing he'd tossed his pack onto the passenger seat. "Just coffee," said John. "I'm a little early for the docks, and they're just around the corner." A new model red Corvette roared by and caught both men's attention. "What about you? What brings you over this way?" The Sioux City Strangler watched as John Pruitt scanned his car. His suitcase was there on the back seat in plain sight. He wondered if John remembered that his last appointment was at 3 p.m. the day before. I just stopped to get something to eat," he said. "Kinda far from home, huh, buddy?" The Sioux City Strangler put his left hand back in his pants pocket and made a fist, digging his fingernails into his palm. Of course John had been to his place. Maria had insisted on inviting him over to dinner every few months. "Well, yeah, I guess so. But it's not too bad, not really that far." "Yeah, I guess not," said John, trying to be polite. He turned to look at the Fellows Diner sign with half the neon tubing shattered from kids throwing beer bottles and baseballs at it. "I guess you come here a lot, huh? What's good?" The Sioux City Strangler struggled to think of an answer that sounded right. "I used to come a lot as a kid, nostalgia, kinda. It's, I usually get the pancakes." "Okay, pancakes. Maybe I could go for a short stack." Another pause, longer than before, stalled the conversation. "Lots of syrup, that's how I like 'em." "With lots of butter, right?" he responded. The two men looked at each other, both trying to think of how to proceed. They had a history together, but neither really knew the other well. Their familiarity was one of proximity, not true friendship. Neither man could think of anything else to say. "Well, okay." John Pruitt put his hand up near his face and tilted it toward his former high school classmate, fellow veteran, and now employee, making a motion somewhere between a salute and a wave with his fingers. "Okay," said the Sioux City Strangler. "Good luck with the big fish today. I know you'll nail it." "Thanks. Believe it or not, I still get nervous. Maybe that's why I try to hide behind my desk these days." "Don't worry, you're a pro. Just be John Pruitt and you'll be fine." John nodded, offering up his half-salute, half-wave one more time as he walked toward the entrance to the Fellows Diner. A waitress promptly greeted him and, with his approval, poured him a cup of coffee as he took his suit jacket off and draped it over the open stool to his left at the counter. "Need a menu, honey?" John Pruitt poured half and half into his coffee as he thought about it. "Yes, I could use a menu," he said, thinking back to the part of the conversation he'd just had that involved pancakes. The waitress was already holding the menu. Carefully avoiding his coffee cup and the cream and sugar and ketchup on the table, she sat it down in front of him. "Let me know when you're ready, honey. Take your time. We're not too busy right now." John Pruitt looked around the diner and noticed that they were, in fact, quite slow. There was a family in a booth over in the far corner. Dad was smoking a cigarette from his pack of Winstons on the table. Junior was picking at French toast without making much of a dent. Mom just looked tired. A man in a tattered red baseball cap and heavy blue coat had his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee at a small table near the bathroom. A short-order cook, looking to get away from the grill for a moment, stood on the dining room side of the single swinging kitchen door in a short-sleeved white t-shirt stained with grease. As he looked around the diner, he noticed that despite the busted neon sign outside and the parking lot in need of paving, the interior space actually looked rather new. The red Naugahyde booths were free of tears, and the linoleum floors weren't yet missing pieces, haphazardly patched up with something close but not quite right. The light fixtures that hung above the bigger tables were of a modern style and up-to-date, if not trendy. John turned back to his coffee and took another sip. He noticed the new coffee machines behind the counter and the stack of mugs emblazoned with the Fellows Diner logo. He added a little more half and half and checked his watch. He wondered if he could get fresh fruit with his pancakes. John Pruitt picked up his menu and, as was his nature, attentively read the text on the front cover. Fellows Diner, a place for friends, family, and fine food. Established 1969. John put the menu down and picked up his cup of coffee without bringing it to his mouth and let out a small sigh, imperceptible even to the waitress standing in front of him, now waiting to take his order. Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, is a Past Due production and was recorded in sunny Los Angeles, California at Past Due Studios. This episode was written by Christopher Chase Godwin. Theme music was written and performed by Michael Wegner. Additional music was written and performed by Michael Wegner and Christopher Chase Godwin. Dialogue editing services were provided by Janet Berry. Additional editing by Karl Weiss at Past Due Studios. Mixing by Tommy Singh. Audio mastering provided by Renee Rojas. Katrina Moan is the executive producer. Learn more about the Sioux City Strangler by visiting SiouxCityStrangler.com today. You can also follow Sioux City Strangler on Instagram for updates and extra content. This week we have special edition Fellows Diner posters available in the Sioux City Strangler store. Visit the website or check out wearepastdue.com to get one for yourself or any Sioux City Strangler superfan on your list. Financial support for this episode was provided by Care Clean Remediation Services. If you're in need of an experienced trauma cleanup crew with full biohazard capabilities, you need Care Clean Remediation Services. We also need to thank the Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group. Don't let big corporations keep you from getting the financial settlement you deserve. Visit the Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group online at cacadvocacy.com to learn more about how they can help. That's all for this season, but make sure you subscribe to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your go-to platform to hear new episodes as soon as they're available. Thank you for listening.